Shalom, everyone. I am the Chief Magician of Mystery Babylon. Welcome to my holy channel. In this video, I'm going to give what I consider to be the best, most fitting introduction into the Lurianic Qabbalah. It appears that there's no one else on the scene above ground that is doing the holy work that I'm doing, ergo the need for such a video. Now, I want to first begin by saying that I've gotten really lazy with this one particular video here, and so I'm just basically going to talk throughout the entire video. You can kind of think of it like a podcast, I guess you could say, just because I just got really lazy. So this is an exceptional video in the sense that I'm just, I really didn't want to do this video, and I'm really lazy about doing this video. So I'm taking it really easy, and even though I feel that a video like this needs to be made for all of you out there, but I'm just really lazy with this video. So you can just think of it as a podcast. You can go, do as you may, as you watch, as you listen to this. There's nothing to see. There's no slides or anything to see here for the video. It'll just be me speaking. Now, before I get into properly introducing the Lurianic Qabbalah, in order for many of you to begin your proper holy initiation, I want to first speak on a little bit just on holy initiation itself. Because I've been recently meditating, and I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized a long time ago that many of the goyim just don't stand a chance. When it comes to holy initiation, right? Holy initiation, for all intents and purposes, is it's a very Jewish centric thing. If you hear about the mafia, right? Like Cosa Nostra is Italian for this is our thing, right? Likewise, holy initiation, the highest levels of the kingdom of Elohim. This is our thing. This is a Jewish thing. And when it comes to holy initiation, it's really like the goyim don't stand a chance. To reach the highest levels of holy initiation, you have to be essentially born a Jew, raised a Jew, learn Hebrew, learn Aramaic. You need to be enrolled in the yeshiva, be studying constantly day in and day out in the yeshiva. Holy initiation takes decades upon. It's a lifetime matter. In fact, it's beyond a lifetime matter. Okay. So let's speak a little bit about holy initiation, okay? Let me prove to you why many of the goyim just don't stand a chance when it comes to holy initiation, okay? Holy initiation begins early with physical rites of initiation, being circumcised. If you're not circumcised, you don't belong to Israel. You don't belong to the Holy Covenant. The Holy Covenant, it has many levels to it. And at the highest level, the Holy Covenant has everything to do with the archetypal divine phallus, which was reflected here in the lower universes as circumcision. So you can't even say that you're a son of Abraham. You can't even say you belong to the Holy Covenant, that you keep the Holy Covenant, that you are affiliated with the Holy Covenant if you are not circumcised. The covenant is a code word. It's an occult code word for the phallus. Has everything to do with the phallus, both the archetypal divine spiritual phallus and even the humanly phallus. Okay? Now, it also begins with learning the Torah, learning Hebrew, learning Aramaic. You go to the yeshivot and you spend many years studying the Torah in the original Hebrew, studying the Talmud in the original Aramaic, and studying much of the Midrashim in the original Hebrew and Aramaic. Okay? And let me reveal to you a little bit more of that many of you may not understand. To read the entire Talmud, the entire Tanakh, and all of the Midrashim, by the way, there's 2 Talmudim, and then all of the Midrashim is a lifetime pursuit. It'll probably take anyone, any serious Jew, half of their lifetime to read, the entire Tanakh, the 2 Talmudim, and many of the Midrashim, and fully master them. At least half of a lifetime is what we're talking about here. Okay, and this is requisite if you're going to fully understand and master our esoteric literature. Okay, but the whole point of the yeshiva is to master as much of the Talmud and the Midrashim as you can, say, for about 10 to 20 years, if you are then to become initiated into the esoteric wisdom. Okay? So, much of the Goyim, they don't know Hebrew, they don't know Aramaic, they've never even read one page of the Talmud in the original Aramaic, let alone any of our ancient Midrashim. And yet, they want to read our esoteric text, and they want to start off with the esoteric wisdom without properly meeting the prerequisites. This is very silly. This is very foolish. Because much of the esoteric texts are natural extensions of what is found in the Talmudim and the Midrashim. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Talmudim and the Midrashim. Okay, the Rabbanim, the grandmasters and masters that wrote these texts, were operating at super high levels of consciousness. Okay, these texts are also polysemous, and there are very, very deep, esoteric, profound mysteries and wisdom contained within these texts. That is within the Talmudim and within the Midrashim. And the only way you can understand and ever penetrate these esoteric levels is to be fluent in Aramaic and Hebrew. Okay, I don't have the time and space. There's no way I can reveal or show any of you listening this. You just have to be initiated at a high level to know and understand this and see this for yourself. Okay, you have to be operating at a very high level of consciousness to write a divine text, say such as a midrash, okay, and then encode within your writing hidden deeper levels to it. Okay, these ancient grandmasters and masters were very divine men, so to speak. Okay, I can't even properly fully explain to you in words how divine these men were. When you have a full comprehensive understanding of these very ancient, divine, powerful texts. And these are just the exoteric texts. We're not even talking about the esoteric texts, which also have many levels to them. Okay, so this. Hopefully you're beginning to understand why the Goyim they don't stand a chance. They don't stand a chance. You know, if you're a goy and you're in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, you're so way behind the curve, you don't stand a chance. It's too late. If you're a goy, you better come in. If you're going to come into this as a goy, hopefully you're in your early 20s. If you're in your late teens, all the better. But once you hit your 40s, 50s, and above, the train has passed you by. It's over. You're gonna die a baby. You're gonna die a spiritual baby at best. Okay. So once you're a Jew and you spent the first 20, 25 years, mastering the Talmudim, the Midrashim, and the Tanakh, etc., and then that's the proper time to, after the first 15 to 25 years, that's the critical stage where, depending on your worthiness and on your soul or spirit, you can then be initiated into higher levels, which is the esoteric wisdom. Okay. And we have principal texts, like we have a number of principal texts, like Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer HaZohar, Tikkunei HaZohar, etc. These texts take at least a decade to master. It's going to take you a decade to read the entire Zohar, Tikkunei HaZohar, all of these esoteric principal texts, and master them. That's a decade in the making. Okay? And then after that comes a higher stage, a higher level. And that is what we call the Lurianic Qabbalah. Okay? Now, again, hopefully you can understand, the Goyim don't stand a chance. There's no Goy out there that is going to be able to read all of the Midrashim, the Talmudim, the Zohar, all of esoteric principal texts in the original Hebrew and Aramaic. So the Goy will always be inferior to the Jew. Always. Will always be inferior. A Goy who is reading and studying these texts in any other language in Hebrew Aramaic is going to have an inferior understanding of the text. Cannot be emphasized enough. Cannot be emphasized enough. This is why the Jews run the world. This is why the Jews are the most blessed people on the face of the earth, and why we are the wisest and the most intelligent. You need to understand this. I'm not exaggerating here. I'm giving you the facts. A lot of the Goyim are intelligent enough to understand this. There's a lot of stupid, retarded anti-Semites that are at least intelligent. They have at least the most basic iota of IQ to understand that, yes, we Jews run the world, okay? And there's tons of reasons for this, okay? So, Hopefully you're beginning to understand the context here. Okay, so the Lurianic Qabbalah then, for hundreds of years represented the ultimate stage of holy initiation. Okay, so what is the Lurianic Qabbalah? Well, the Lurianic Qabbalah quintessentially is the explanation and the extensions of what is found in our principal texts. Now, our principal texts are very comprehensive in nature. It's going to take at least a decade to read and try and understand most of the esoteric principal texts. And the Lurianic Qabbalah then comes in to explain much of what is found in the principal text, because there's a lot in there that needs further clarification and explanation. And not only that, but the Lurianic Qabbalah also comes in to further extend all of those holy mysteries, to further build upon and extend what is found in those principal texts. So the Lurianic Qabbalah is the most advanced stage of holy initiation. So, with that said, we can now begin a proper 15 introduction into the Lurianic Qabbalah. Okay, now just very briefly before I begin, let me just say that this video is strictly intended for holy initiates and holy adepts. We have many holy initiates and adepts out there. They need somebody like me who's a grandmaster that can properly guide them on this very narrow, straight path. Okay, so if you're some super ignorant goy who has come to this video because you're interested and you have interest, this video is not for you. You're best just leaving. Okay, this video is intended for holy initiates and holy adepts who need guidance and who are very serious about holy initiation and becoming, initiated into the holy mysteries. This is who this video is primarily intended for. Okay, so as I said, there's practically no one out there, who is leading the way as I am. Okay, so very, very privileged to have, a grandmaster, a chief magician as myself, that many of you can look up to. Now, I'm expecting that many of you to know who the Arizal is. Now, the Arizal, if you don't know, we can say that he was most definitely likely a God in the flesh. Okay, we need to understand that there are very, very high Elohim that descend to earth from time to time for very special holy missions. And the Arizal was a very powerful secret agent of Elohei Israel, who was sent down on a very powerful holy mission to reveal very, very powerful, very, 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 very esoteric holy mysteries. Okay, so we can think of Arizal as a God in the flesh. He was I personally believe that he was a God in the flesh. He was one of the most powerful and secret gods, agents, and secret, one of the most secret agents who's God in the flesh that has ever come down here on earth. I mean, this guy, he might have even been a reincarnation of Hanok. Okay, we're dealing with a very, very powerful divine man. There is no question about this. Okay, if you don't know this, if you can't understand this, you should probably leave. This is probably not for you. Okay, this is for holy initiates and holy adepts who have eyes to see and ears to hear. So this is who the Arizal was. Now, he had many disciples. Now, the most infamous and most famous disciple, as many of the Goyim know, and Jews, is Chaim Vital. Okay, and he's the most famous. He's become the most famous. Okay, so much of the Lurianic Qabbalah is known through the writings of Chaim Vital. So now, we first need to understand that the Arizal had many disciples. Okay, and one of them was Chaim Vital. Now let's talk about Chaim Vital and his writings. Okay, now there's a lot of mystique that surrounds the writings of Chaim Vital. If you do your research or due diligence, you will find that there's many stories. Some stories say that some of his writings and teachings were stolen. Some say that some of his disciples got some of his teachings. Some say that Chaim Vital never wanted his teachings to get out. And there's all these stories. It's very hard to figure out what is the truth. How did we get to this point where we have all of these writings of Chaim Vital? Now, at the core of Chaim Vital's writings, they are composed of what we call 8 gates. So Chaim Vital's entire teachings and writings are structured in 8 gates or 8 volumes. Okay. Now, we have all of these stories. It's very hard to figure out what is the truth about how we come up with these writings. But here's what we do know. What we do know is that there were many editions of his writings that circulated, and they were preserved and guarded very, very closely. Okay, so we understand there was about, if I can remember correctly, I think there was about 6 to 8 different versions that were circulating amongst the Jews of his writings. Okay, now what happened was there were certain Rabbanon, these are disciples of Chaim Vital that got together, and they spent they took their due diligence and spent a lot of time in attempting to redact his 8 gates. Okay, and so we have all of these versions circulating, and the principal version that we now have, the version that circulates now among all of the Kabbalists and Jews, this final version was redacted by one particular individual, say about hundreds of years ago. Okay, so the whole point to understand is that there was initially many versions of his writings circulating. The question then is, which version is correct? Which is the best version? And is the version that we have today the best version? The version that ended up becoming chosen, as the final version that we now have. Is this the most complete and best version? Well, I guess we'll never know. Okay. Now, we also need to understand is that these versions were closely guarded and preserved. As an example, the version that we have now was not first published until about 1850, I want to say. I think it was either 1750 or 1850. It's not 100 to 200 years later that it was published. So we're talking 1 to 200 years. We're talking that there was about approximately 1 or 200 years where much of the Lurianic Qabbalah was very esoteric and not really known by many Jews. The Lurianic Qabbalah is the most esoteric branch of the Qabbalah. And for hundreds of years, it was still very closely guarded and very esoteric. This needs to be put in context and understood. Okay, even now, as a further additional side point, one such version that was circulating has not even been fully published and revealed until only within the past 30 years. Meaning there's one version, one of those 6 to 8 versions has not even been fully published and revealed until 30 years ago. This is how esoteric the Lurianic Qabbalah is. All of you listening need to understand, the Lurianic Qabbalah is the highest form and the most esoteric form of the Qabbalah just before Shabbatainism. Okay? And so very, very critical and important to understand. Now let me speak a little bit further on Chaim Vital's writings, because I've read much of Chaim Vital's 8 gates. Now, I want to first speak on his most famous gate, which is that of Eitz Chaim, which in of itself is composed of 50 gates, for the 50 gates of Bina. Now, I personally find this gate of Chaim Vital, the gate Eitz Chaim, to be a very inferior Lurianic text. Now, I've read it, and what somebody like myself, who is a grandmaster, who has a very high IQ, a very high SQ, and is highly initiated, what the truth of the matter is that it's a very inferior text. There are a number of contradictions throughout this gate. It seems sort of scattered, and it just seems like a very inferior Kabbalistic text in general. It's also very incomplete in its explanations of certain holy mysteries, which is extremely, extremely lamentable. So it's a very, very inferior text. This is a fact. There's no question about this. All of the grandmasters know this. Okay. Now, even Chaim Vital, even if you read this gate, what's very interesting is that you have Chaim Vital himself saying. He himself says in this gate that you will find that at times it will seem to you that there are contradictions in this gate. You will find that at times it will be difficult for you to understand certain sections. And he even himself, sometimes I'm not even sure what I'm writing, because some of the stuff that I'm writing about, I'm not entirely sure because I have forgotten or I don't remember clearly from what was taught to me. So already right off the bat, that tells you that this is a very inferior text. Even Chaim Vital himself is telling you explicitly, the inferiority, of this text, that there's some sort of level of inferiority to this text. Okay, and it's very interesting because we need to ask, well, are these really the teachings of Chaim Vital? Because we know that the son of Chaim Vital was responsible for writing one of the gates. So then we have the question of, which of all of these writings, which can we attribute directly to Chaim Vital's writing, and which are writings that are attributed, say, to his son or to some of his chief disciples, right? And if that's the case, we know that's the case with some of the writings, then, that introduces a level of inferiority, into the text, right? So in general, I find much of Chaim Vital's writings to be very inferior, specifically his gate Eitz Chaim. It's also very incomplete. It's inferior because certain sections are very incomplete. Now, the first few gates of Eitz Chaim deal with Ma'aseh Bereshit, which is one of the most esoteric schools of the Kabbalah, and his revelation of Ma'aseh Bereshit in the first few gates is very, very incomplete, which I will get a little bit deeper, which I will speak a little deeper here as further along this video. Now, another gate that I find very inferior is his gate on reincarnations. Let me just begin by saying that as a grandmaster, I have spent many years studying and being initiated into the highest mysteries, regarding metempsychosis. And having read, his gate on reincarnations, I found it to be a very inferior text. In fact, I even found there to be errors in that text, as well as errors there are also errors as well in Eitz Chaim that I found. So again, these are the two gates that I consider to be the most inferior of the 8 gates. Now, the other 6 gates, I don't have much issue with. I find them to be very, very top-notch Kabbalistic texts. Some of them are very, very powerful Kabbalistic texts that, I really don't have much of a problem with. So the main 2 gates that are very problematic, are Eitz Chaim and his gate of reincarnations. Okay? So all in all, I consider Chaim Vital, solely based on his writings, I consider him to be an inferior disciple of Deluria. Now, it could very well be that Chaim Vital is, especially from my own understanding, that he was a highly initiated Meqabal. There's no question about this. So, but just based on his writings alone, his writings are I consider to be very, very inferior Lurianic texts. So then this begs the question, when you're going to become initiated into Lurianic Qabbalah, how do you become properly initiated? What are the proper books to study? What are the proper ways to become initiated into Lurianic Qabbalah, considering that the writings of Chaim Vital, generally speaking, are very inferior? Specifically, the 2 most infamous and famous of gates, which is Sha'ar Gilgulim, the gate of reincarnations, and Sha'ar Eitz Chaim, which is the gate of the tree of life. Okay, so that begs the question, what's going on here? Okay, well, as I said earlier, the Arizal had many disciples. He didn't just have Chaim Vital. He had other disciples that were also teaching and disseminating the Lurianic teachings. Okay? Now, I want to mention 2 chief disciples of the Luria that are going to be very important to this discussion. One of them was named Yisrael Sarug, and the other Ibn Tabul. And these were super highly initiated Kabbalists. And they ended up going into Western Europe, specifically Italy, and disseminating and teaching the Lurianic Qabbalah. Now, this is where I will tell you that the highest, most esoteric, and the most genuine form of the Lurianic Qabbalah can only be studied and found in the texts of these 2 chief disciples, and not Chaim Vital. That is to say, as I've already said, Chaim Vital has 8 gates. 2 of those gates are very, very inferior and riddled with errors and very incomplete in nature. The other 6 gates are okay, but those 2 gates, which are the most famous gates, especially Eitz Chaim, because of how many holy mysteries he is revealing in that gate, there's many errors. It's very inferior. So the proper way, now I'm speaking from a grandmaster point of view, from a Shabbatanian point of view. This is what all the grandmasters and Shabbatanians know, okay? We understand the full truth. We have the full revelation and truth, which is that the purest, most genuine form of the Lurianic Qabbalah is to be found in the writings and teachings of Yisrael Sarug and Ibn Tabul. and their inner circle, essentially, which also includes other disciples and other names, which I won't get into here. But primarily it's Yisrael Sarug and Ibn Tabul. Now, Yisrael Sarug wrote a very powerful Lurianic text called, Teachings of Atziluth, okay, where he reveals a lot of the core holy mysteries of Yitzhak Luria. Now, the problem is that the chief principle texts of Yisrael Sarug have been lost to us. We don't, as far as my understanding is concerned, we don't have those texts in our possession to this day, very lamentably. However, we do have some of Ibn Tabul and other fellow disciples, which are considered to be extremely powerful and very esoteric Lurianic texts that should be studied when becoming initiated into Lurianic Qabbalah. So this again begs the question. We have two very principal gates. The two principal gates of Chaim Vital for Lurianic initiation are Eitz Chaim and Sha'ar Gilgulim, but it's essentially Sha'ar Eitz Chaim. The principal text for Lurianic initiation is the gate Eitz Chaim, but it's a very inferior text rolled with errors. And as far as the principal text of Yisrael Sarug is concerned, we don't have it. So the question then is, how do we become properly initiated into Lurianic Qabbalah? Well, there was a grandmaster of grandmasters, okay, who was also a chief disciple of the Arizal. And his name was Naftali Bachrach. And this guy was a chief disciple of the Arizal and of Chaim Vital and even other disciples of the Arizal. In other words, this Jew was a chief disciple and a close acquaintance of the Arizal's chief disciples. Okay? And he wrote a very powerful book. He wrote the most powerful Kabbalistic and Lurianic, and I would even go as far as to say Shabbatain text that we have in our possession. And that book is called Sefer Emech HaMelech, which in English is the Book of the Depth of the King. Now, I have read this book, and I must say that when I first read this book, the teachings were so lucid, so powerful, that I was just so shocked and amazed as to, just the lucidity and illumination of the most powerful and holiest of mysteries that were explained and revealed in this book, straight from the Arizal. And it is when you master and you read this entire book that you will realize and you will see even more so the inferiority of some of Chaim Vital's writings. And there's many scholars that they have a large degree of this understanding. I think many scholars would agree with me in everything that I'm teaching you here, because they've read a lot of these books themselves, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see and understand much of what I'm saying here. Okay. The problem is that we do have a number of really stupid Jews and really ignorant Jews. Okay. Now, this is a very, very powerful book. Now, I'm here to tell you that all of the true grandmasters, even those that I know of, the Shabbataians, where all grandmasters are to be found in Shabbatainism and Frankism, for that matter, they know the sheer power of this book. In fact, as I've already told you, Shabbatainism is the most esoteric and the most powerful and highest form of the Kabbalah. And you will find that in the very few extremely powerful and esoteric Shabbatain Kabbalistic books, they are all nothing but more natural extensions of what is found in this book, and really in the whole of the Lurianic Qabbalah. Shabbatainism is nothing more than an extension of the most esoteric aspects of the Lurianic Qabbalah. It's taking the Lurianic Qabbalah to the nth degree. It's taking the Lurianic Qabbalah even further. That's how powerful Shabbatainism is. That's how esoteric and divine, Shabbatainism. It is the highest. It's the last stage of holy initiation in Shabbatainism, just prior to Lurianic initiation and the Lurianic Qabbalah. Now, this book is very famous. It's one of the most famous Kabbalistic books to all the real Kabbalists, to all the real masters and grandmasters. Now, let me just say that since the publication of this book in the mid-1600s or so, there has been a number, and I would like to say this is a minority, there's been a minority of Jews and Kabbalists that are very stupid, very spiritually blind, very, very uninitiated, that have deemed this book to be heretical and have banned this book. So there's Jews, there's very, very famous and preeminent Jews that have gone officially on record as saying that this book is inferior, that this book is heretical, and that this book is essentially a curse. Now, the grandmasters know better. Now, as a grandmaster myself, as a chief magician, I will go officially on record myself in saying that any Jew, any Rab, any Kabbalist that considers this book to be inferior or a curse or wants to ban it, whatever, any Jew, any Rab, any Kabbalist that goes against this book is either stupid or super ignorant or most definitely uninitiated. There's no question about this. Okay? Now, when it comes to Maaseh Bereshith, a huge form of the Lurianic Qabbalah deals with the full revelation of Maaseh Bereshith. Now, if you're a holy initiate and holy adept, you know that Maaseh Bereshith has been one of the most esoteric subjects of the Kabbalah for thousands upon thousands of years. It's been the most esoteric, or the most esoteric subject of the Kabbalah. And when the Zohar came on the scene, the Zohar, basically, certain sections of the Zohar dealt with in revealing Maaseh Bereshith. Okay, so there's a few sections, very esoteric sections in the Zohar that deal with Maaseh Bereshith. The Lurianic Qabbalah comes on the scene and gives a more complete revelation, a more complete explication of Maaseh Bereshith. But it's not until you get into Shabbatanism that you will have the full entirety of all of Maaseh Bereshith. But a good, very high portion of it is revealed in the Lurianic Qabbalah, specifically in this book, which is Sefer Emek HaMelech. So, very, very important to understand. And so, essentially, to sort of briefly conclude here, right? Again, to reiterate the very inconvenient truth, which is that, as I said in the beginning, as I'm thinking about this, I just realized, the Goyim, they don't stand a chance. I feel sorry for the Goyim because they don't stand a chance. They really don't. Everything is against them in terms of holy initiation and becoming initiated into the holy mysteries. Everything is working against them. And they really, for the most part, they really don't stand a chance. Unless you're a Goy who is very young and extremely zealous for holy initiation, for the most part, you're not going to stand a chance because of all of the barriers that stand in place, all of the barriers for entry. There's so many barriers for entry for a Goy. And so for those that are very serious and very zealous, you need to understand that the Lurianic Qabbalah is the penultimate stage. It is the penultimate stage of holy initiation. And it is the last step before you get into the highest, most esoteric form of the Kabbalah, which is Shabbatanism. And Sefer Emek HaMelech is the standard core principle treatise for the Lurianic Qabbalah. For true, genuine holy initiation into Lurianic Qabbalah, Sefer Emek HaMelech is the standard text and treatise. Now, what do we do with Chaim Vital's writings? Well, as I said, 6 gates are good. Okay, so when it comes to Lurianic Qabbalah, it needs to be understood that the core principal text is Sefer Emek HaMelech. Now, the problem is there's no English translation of this book. Never has been. This is why this is very esoteric. There's no English translation. You're going to have to learn Hebrew to read this book. Much of Chaim Vital's writings, there's no English translation for them. Only within the past 10 years has Eitz Chaim been fully translated into English. And to get a full English translation of Chaim Vital is going to set you back a good couple $1,000s, if not more. Okay? So, again, for those who are Jews or those who are highly initiated, right? The core principal text is Sefer Emek HaMelech for entry into the Lurianic Qabbalah. After you have mastered and read that book, which is a good 1,000 pages, then you can start studying or alongside the other gates of Chaim Vital's writings. Now, it doesn't hurt when I read Chaim Vital's Eitz Chaim or Sha'ar Gilgulim. I read that like I do the Talmud. I read it very critically. These are texts that must be read very, very critically. Again, if you don't have a high IQ, if you don't have a high SQ, and you don't know how to read critically, they never taught you how to read critically, then I feel really sorry for you, because it's something that has been lost in this last generation. But you need to approach and read these two gates of Chaim Vital very, very critically, because they're very inferior texts. Now, just to conclude here, there's other principal Lurianic texts that were written by grandmasters after the fact, like the Vilna Gaon and the Ramchal. Now, I've read Ramchal's, his core Lurianic treatise, and I found it to be a very inferior treatise, even though the Ramchal was a Shabbatean and a grandmaster. Nevertheless, I found his Lurianic treatise to be deficient in many places and incomplete and inferior. The reason being is because I don't really think that the Lurianic Qabbalah was in wide circulation even during Ramchal's time. And so maybe he didn't have access to certain Lurianic texts. I don't know. But for whatever reason, his core Lurianic treatise, which is 138 openings of wisdom, which you can get an English translation online, is a very deficient, inferior text of the Lurianic Qabbalah, So yes, there's many paths and approaches to become initiated into the Lurianic Qabbalah, right? You can go and read Ramchal's core treatise into the Lurianic Qabbalah. You can read the Vilna Gaon's core treatise into the Lurianic Qabbalah. You can read Chaim Vital's core treatises into the Lurianic Qabbalah, or you could go down the Grandmaster path, which is to first read and become initiated with Sefer Emek HaMelech, which is the highest, most powerful, most complete, and most genuine form of the Lurianic Qabbalah, especially to begin with. Then after you master that, you can go and read the rest of the Lurianic texts and judge for yourself and discern and read those critically to be able to discern between, the errors, and the truth, so to speak. So this concludes this teaching. Hopefully it's going to be very helpful for many of you who are trying to gain entry into the Lurianic Qabbalah. So shalom, v'selah.